Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. Your host, Stevie Garofalo. Appreciate you returning. Listen, I want to talk to you today about, are Christians no different than we were back in 60 A.D.? Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. You know, Reason for Truth, truth always comes first. That's our point, and then we back it up with the reasons. But we're always and constantly learning. We stop learning, we stop teaching, or we stop teaching well at least. And so that being said, I want to address today's subject from the perspective of the Bible, not AI, but the perspective of the Bible. Listen, Paul wrote this letter of Philippians chapter, we're going to look at chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. It says this, "For many of whom I have often told you and now tell you, even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction. Their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame, with minds set on earthly things." That's Philippians 3, 18 and 19. That's in the ESV. What is Paul talking about in these verses, 18 and 19? Well, the answer really lies in the Christians within the Philippian church, that the same issues that plagued them back in 60 AD were the same issues that plague the church today. You know, some are better, some are worse. But some of the Christians were back in Paul's day, and writing to the Philippians there, some of them were disruptive, and that they might be called so-called Christians in name only. I mean, every church has got cultural Christians, I would believe. And for others, there were Christians who were more focused on personal ambition, perfectionism, and antinomianism. What the heck is that? Well, in the end, that is, I think, the center of all the other sins, if you ask me. So what is antinomianism? There you go. It's a basically theological view that Christians in particular are free from the moral law, even the Ten Commandments, right, based on God's grace. So they justified this view as a byproduct or result of grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone. It essentially argues that because salvation is by grace alone, adherence to the moral law is not a requirement or a reflection of one's faith. So this view, though, the problem is it contrasts legalism, right, which can be an issue for some, which emphasizes the importance of strictly adhering to the law for salvation and a way to demonstrate one's faith. Now, I want to break this down for you further because I think sometimes, listen, the law has to be more firmly kept to, and there's other times where, listen, at the end of the day, when we mess up, we relax on grace, but we accept God's grace and His patience. But we have to understand that the benchmark is the law. It's God's ways that we have to adhere to. So first, grace alone. Antinomianism emphasizes that the salvation is achieved solely through God's grace, received by faith, not by works or obedience to the law. Second, it's the view that freedom from the law is a thing to be embraced. So this view suggests that Christians are free from the obligation to obey the moral law, including the Ten Commandments, which I think is crazy, as a result of what? God's grace again. Put another way, since we are under God's grace, we can live as we like, think as we like, and sin as we like is the end result if we're not careful. This is made evident in our own lives, as well as Christians who side with the illegal. Well, I thought about this. The whole issue of migrants and illegal aliens being in the country. I don't want to get this too political, but the bottom line is, if you're here illegally, that is a law. If the country changes the law to say that anybody can come and go when they please, that's a different story. But long as it is a law, it's to be adhered to. And I admit, I'm baffled as to why Christians don't get that. Hey, listen, if you got a person here and there that's escaping, a bad situation in their country, that makes sense. But if the law says, 20 million people are here for a better life, but can break the law, well, then what makes it? Listen, why can someone robbing a bank for a better life? Why isn't that allowed? See what I'm saying? That's the law. The law is the law. So the law was given to us by God, and we have been commanded to follow the law given to us by God. And listen, and man's law should be, as long as it's based on God's laws, with the exception of causation of literal death, right? So if the law says, abortion is to be mandated, well, we ought not do that. So while this may appear to be legalism, you say, well, Steve, you're pretty strict. Well, you can claim is that legalism, the law becomes relative. If you don't have any law, then everything's, well, it's right for me, but it's not wrong for you, or right for me, not for you. I wrote a whole book on that title, right for me, but not for you. Because if there's no law, then who's are we adhering to? We're adhering to how we feel about the situation. Well, these people are really nice. They're here. And there's a lot of abuse, by the way, and even abuse by our companies hiring cheap labor at the expense of American people. So how does that work out? Is that ethical? Is that moral? Is that legal? Okay. Leaving anyone free to proclaim that any enforcement of the law is legalism, right? I mean, it's easy to say, well, you're not compassionate, Steve, these people. Okay, listen, I get it. But the point is, you can't break the law because you feel that's a good thing. Okay. Furthermore, you can change the law. Antinomanianism also leads to the rejection of legalism, because antinomanianism rejects the idea that adherence to rules and regulations is necessary for what justification. So historically, antinomanianism has appeared in various forms, really, throughout Christian history. I mean, some examples include Anne Hutchinson in the Massachusetts Bay Colony being a notable example. Going back, and you look that up, going back to early America, got the controversy in the 17th century centered around Hutchins' teachings, which were seen as antinomian by the Puritan authorities. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. We could do that in another episode. You got Martin Luther, who addressed and debated antinomian views within the context of the Reformation. So it's not like this is a new subject, but let's look at the points of debate. Okay, first is the misunderstanding of grace, because that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk today more about legalism versus grace. First is a misunderstanding of grace. Critics of antinomianism argue that it can lead to a misunderstanding of God's character, and then the nature of salvation, potentially leading to disregard for morality, at least God's morality. Second is the lack of sanctification. Some worry that antinomian views might discourage Christians from striving for really more holiness and good works, doing good things, which often is seen as a natural outflow of a saving faith. So this leaves open the potential really for abuse in that antinomianism could be used to justify immoral behavior, as it may be interpreted as a license to disregard the boundaries. So let's look at some key differences, starting with a focus on law versus grace. Legalism emphasizes an adherence to the law as a means of salvation. Some people think if I just keep the law, do good works, that's going to get me salvation, or a demonstration of my faith at the very least, while antinomianism focuses on grace alone. You see, you need to read through this passage, read through the whole chapter, and then process it. Ask God to show you the truth, because in conclusion, antinomianism presents a complex and often controversial theological perspective on the relationship between grace and the law and Christian living. And Paul was telling them, listen, it's good, don't be legalistic, but don't take the law for granted and abuse it, okay? Legalists they seek to obey the law out of a fear of punishment, right? Or to perhaps earn God's favor, while antinomians, they engage in good works, right? Would do so out of gratitude for God's grace. But the issue is really the inner transformation, okay? That's the key. Because if we're inner transformed, we're going to seek to follow the law, but understand that we mess up daily and we're going to depend on God's grace. That's all there is to it. Antinomianism is at its best emphasizes the importance of the inner transformation of the heart through faith, which should lead to a changed life, right? Though not as a requirement or punishment, or for a requirement for salvation. That's all I'll say on the matter. You read with Paul, that was dealing with these things, but all the other areas of morality, they say to flow from this whole view of, do I depend on my grace? Is that being abused? Or are you just legalistic? So that's all I'll say. God's blessings to you. Read that passage, man. Make sure, join my community at StephenGarofalo.com. Love to see you over there. That's where I do my posting, not on the Facebook. You'll see just the podcast there. So God's blessings to you. Make sure you leave any comments below, but see you at the community, StephenGarofalo.com. And of course, I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. This is your Reason for Truth for today.